Vorwort. Da dies eine Reflexion über Zeit in Echtzeit sein wird, Zeit, die ich entlang der Zeitbegriffe der deutschen Sprache und ihre Analyse getriebene Ängste untersuchen werde, ist die Stimmung dieses Textes Stimmung selbst. Er reflektiert sich endlos auf sich selbst, während Zeit vergeht. Jetzt, jetzt, jetzt. Jetzt. Jetzt und jetzt. In seltenen Momenten verliere ich mein Ähnlichkeitsbewusstsein. Einer davon ist das Schreiben. Auch wenn ich die Notwendigkeit eines eventuellen Endes des Schreibens auf den affizierten Zeitdrucks, der meine Fristängste noch schürt, anerkennen muss und meine Verlegerinnen diesen Text am 18. Januar benötigen. 6 Tage entfernt von meinem Jetzt, an dem ich zu schreiben beginne. Heute ist der 12. Januar und ohne besagten Druck hätte ich ihn niemals auch nur einen Tag vor den 4 Wochen beendet, die vergehen werden bis zum 12. Februar, dem Zeitpunkt, an dem ich ihn euch verlese. Dieses Jetzt bedeutet anachronistischerweise, dass ich mein eigenes Jetzt verschiebe, jetzt, und zum dann zu werden, zu jenem Jetzt. Das wir gemeinsam erfahren, sodass der Text zugleich geschrieben, gehört und gedruckt gelesen wird, in einem einzigen Raum-Zeit-Kontinuum. Beginnen wir also mit Kant. German philosophy births modernity by making limits central to its era, fostering a structural, time-based anxiety that Western thought is burdened by henceforth. Being Swedish, I know very well the paradoxical experience of being deeply secular, whilst also indoctrinated with Protestant morals, prompting a kind of dialectical philosophical bent which absconds from theology where free thinking becomes a paradoxality in itself. A secularized inheritance of adhering to pious morals, which dwells within guilt ascribed to unfinishedness, but reaping none of the rewards of the lightness that may arise from the potential of eternity. It appears to me that we've sufficiently crucified enlightenment in favor of existential weightedness. Naturally, German thought grew suspicious of the era of enlightenment, where sum of time amounted to progress, one in which betterment occurred, knowledge accumulated, and fault could be mended by its passing through time, which in turn produced patience, optimism, and trust in reform. Kant sets aflame the canon which destabilizes this enlightened naivete by cementing that time cannot save us. What it can do is test us, and it seems it can test us endlessly. Kant is followed by Hegel, who introduces the violence in which time undoes itself, followed by Heidegger, in contrast to whom Kant appears as a mere hors d'oeuvre of Zeitangst, as we're directed into Sein zum Tode, being towards death. Time is thus introduced as an existential Stimmung that cannot be undone from the German canon of thought. If affected by the idea that authenticity emerges in the anticipation of existence's finitude, and if orienting through life according to sein zum Tode, does all writing become writing towards death? Or can we contest the suggestion that being is a prolonged rehearsal for not being? Rilke writes death as a benefit to life, where our finitude grants life a quality other than that of angels. Moments in a person's life can seem eternal only because they are finite, and the eigene Tod, one's own death, becomes an act of agency which the angel lacks, a condition of meaning only the card carriers of inevitable finitude are granted. Angels exist as proof of this being outside of time, precisely because they are outside of death. And Rilke offers us poetry in finitude. We're not confined to being towards death, but we are able to reflect on the luxury of living, precisely because we have the luxury of dying. Heidegger, one of Rilke's closest readers, subsequently killed his idol when destroying all possibility for beauty in the application of being towards death, when he aligns with the very collapse of agency of one's own death, in supporting the horrors of the Shoah, which collapses Heidegger's philosophies and Rilke's poetry into a final moment of its own. In post-war Rilke, it's hard to find beauty in finitude, and in Heidegger's case, his concept of the eigene Tod becomes a violent oxymoron, because when death is no longer one's own, it cannot be accepted as a vital part of life. Als das Kind war, war es die Zeit der folgenden Fragen. Warum bin ich und warum nicht du? Warum bin ich hier und warum nicht dort? Wann begann die Zeit und wo endet der Raum? Ist das Leben unter der Sonne nicht bloß ein Traum? Ist was ich sehe und höre und reiche nicht bloß der Schein einer Welt vor der Welt? When the omniscient narrator, representing the immortal angelic consciousness in the Himmel über Berlin, recites Peter Handke's poem, I think of a child's time, or perhaps precisely the lack of a child's time, thinking devoid of language and concepts, removed from existential influence, and I think, what a luxury, having once been unknowing. And that we all begin our time this way, devoid of our own finitude, lacking knowing, undisturbed because unlearned, and perhaps because we're not allowed the memory of our own unawareness, witnessing this presence of timelessness can be seen as a retroactive gift of understanding that we were all immortal once. Time can also situate itself extremely concretely as allegories within everyday cultural form, literally as banal attempts depicting temporality. A vanitas painting is nothing if not a conduit for tropes of mortality, a still life depicting futility, impermanence, and impending nothingness. Skulls, hourglasses, clocks, watches, smoke from a just extinguished candle. Allegories so familiar they hardly need elucidation. Instruments representing transient pleasure. Rotting fruit and wilting flowers representing decay and perishability. Books, maps, globes, marking the limits of time devoted to knowledge. Coins and jewelry, showing the futility of material riches in the face of mortality. No one can buy their way out of an end. and bubbles. In Henrik Goltzius' Quis evadet, a rather bulbous cherub stretches his hand for bubbles drifting just out of reach, whilst reclining over a skull as if it were a chaise lounge. An example par excellence of the extremely Baroque German Baroque. In Carrel Dujardin's Boy Blowing Soap Bubbles, allegory on the transitoriness and the brevity of life, a boy serves an empty iridescent clamshell whilst blowing bubbles across the ocean. And in Caspar Netscher's A Boy Blowing Bubbles, another indeed exhausted allegorical boy blows bubbles. Although I doubt the raison d'être of this painting being that of a vanitas, it seems to depict a bourgeois boy's playtime rather than that of existing in between appearance and disappearance. In these later secular vanitas, the allegory doesn't seem to work, leading me to the conclusion that this boy is not dying at all, if not surrounded by exhausted cliches. The use of bubbles is a dialectic depiction without object, pointing towards that which exists in between presence and absence. But all I can think of is the joy children experience when they experience bubbles. The joy adults I experience when I experience bubbles. I went to a birthday party with Unni some months ago in a park where they had this huge bubble rope and stick instruments in which bubbles are no longer just bubbles but spheres, amorphous bulbous bodies, tunnels, orbs. I was in awe and not in any way dying. I mentioned the symbolism of vanitas because I want to talk about flowers. Es kommen härtere Tage. Die auf Widerruf gestundete Zeit wird sichtbar am Horizont. Bald musste den Schuh schnüren und die Hunde zurückjagen in die Marschhöfe. Denn die Eigeweide der Fische sind kalt geworden im Wind. Ärmlich brennt das Licht der Lupinen. Dein Blick spürt im Nebel. Die auf Widerruf gestundete Zeit wird sichtbar am Horizont. Drüben versinkt ihr der Geliebte in Sand. Steigt ihr wehendes Haar. Fällt ihr ins Wort. Befiehlt ihr zu schweigen. Findet sich sterblich und willigt dem Abschied nach jeder Umarmung. Sieh dich nicht schnür deinen Schuh, jag die Hunde zurück, wirf die Fische ins Meer, lösch die Lupinen. Es kommen härtere Tage. Es kommen härtere Tage is the most popular quote from Ingeborg Bachmann's Die gezündete Zeit. But I prefer to look closer at the line, lösch die Lupinen. I know the lupines have been glowing prior to this, but still, to extinguish the lupines deserves a vanitas consideration of their own, in their not as obvious state of decay, but in their potentiality of decay, their in-between state in an in-between time. And these flowers, in my mind, surpasses the allegorical promise of bubbles. Lupines are living, growing flowers. You do not extinguish flowers. You extinguish fires. Bachmann often lets linguistic error carry meaning, and I do love a fault. To extinguish is to respond to an emergency, a call to action in a moment before irreversible damage, a narrow temporal window in which you can stop something from being consumed. The command, the exclamation point, means that the something has already begun. The call is to act now, before time passes into the too late. The deeply German, deeply modern fear of Verspätung is what I interpret Bachmann attempting to avoid when calling out to extinguish the lupines. Conceptualizing Verspätung is not merely pointing to the act of being too late, zu spät, but it contains within it a correct time that one has already failed to meet. You are not late to something, but belatedness is your condition. One arrives not late to a place, a date, a time, but one has the feeling of having arrived too late within one's life. Verspätung must be considered a modern, post-industrial conception of temporal anxiety, because before the train line, time was local, seasonal, and uneven. A town clock might not have read the same time as a neighboring town's clock. Tiny time zones, massive margins for error. Being on time was not yet a fully formed concept, since time was a variable. So being too late and conceptualizing lateness as an existential delay would have been an abstract far too far-fetched. But with the train's arrival, punctuality becomes a moral discipline, which means delay becomes a fault. Perhaps then the exactitude with which psychoanalysts are able to pinpoint temporal anxieties is owed to the Prussian state, prizing Ordnung, Planung, and Discipline, in which delay equates moral laxity. Now, couple this with our Protestant attitudes, and Verspätung is not a trivial lateness, it is an ontological displacement. You don't just miss the event, you miss your place in being. And although this might just be a very long build-up for a pun which lands hard on the Deutsche Bahn's tendency to delay endlessly, often resulting in Kafkaesque situations in which you lose track of whether you were coming or going, I consider Bachmann's call for action to extinguish the lupines as the line which places her writing in a threshold time. Time as urgency, not as finitude, neither too late nor too early. Time, exclamation point. The flowers are burning, but they can be extinguished. This call is what separates them from bubbles, being, then not being. We cannot stop a bubble from bursting. And the line in the poem is not equivocal, it ends with an exclamation mark. Act now, Bachmann says. You are not too late. Verspätung can be delayed or avoided altogether. Before catastrophe, there is no narrative needed to justify the calamity, and only if urgency is not acted upon and the call for intervention is ignored, will the feeling of being too late ensue. The poem is maybe then an anti-memento mori. It orients the subject away from death and towards responsibility. Lösch die Lupinen, memento agere, time to act. When Bachmann writes Die gestundete Zeit, she also coins her own temporal position of deferred time. But somehow I don't think that what she does is as simple as deferring time. And Lösch die Lupinen seems to me to be the epitome of clarifying the position. A moment which comes with the potential of coming too late as well as too early. It exists only as an exact moment when one has a chance to act with urgency, or else be faced with one of the two temporal absolutes. By suspending time this way, Bachmann, in my mind, lives forever. Whereas I ascribe to Bachmann an attempt to avert Verspätung, the German language allows anxiety to solidify into nouns. Verspätung, Verfehlung, Verzug, Versäumnis. Last year I postponed an exhibition and now it's in a few weeks. I'm reaping the benefits of deferred time, and I wonder if this is a sustainable tactic in life. Sometimes I wish I would have postponed more things so that what I postponed would always be just around the corner. Everyone knows that Sisyphus is condemned to push and roll the stone up and down in eternity, and everyone loves to resort to hyperbole when describing some menial administrative task as Sisyphean. But fewer know that this is Sisyphus's punishment for tricking death and thus for stealing time. Condemning him to eternal life seems the cruelest of damnations for his temporal fraud, considering he's doomed to exist in endless time with endless lack of progress. And whilst Faust has become the pervasive folklore for cheating death, thus deferring time, there are so many mythical figures who attempt similar acts. The poet Orpheus strikes a deal to bring his beloved Eurydice back to the living, and for a moment she exists in a liminal state of being, not yet dead, but not yet alive. And it is Orpheus himself who solidifies her death, by failing to do the smallest task, by not looking back. A part of the story which is described as tragic, and tragedy always seems to me to imply some kind of poetry, but a fact that has always struck me as absurdly, frustratingly, idiotically moronic, and in response I cannot control my outrage at Orpheus' stupidity. My favorite story as a child, and the most impressive feat of deferring time, is still that of Scheherazade. During 1001 nights, Scheherazade keeps from dying, not by the hands of myths, but by the very real hands of man. Every night she stretches her own time through storytelling, cheating death, the act, not the persona. But through her skill as narrator, her life extends one story at a time. Her tactic is didactic. Maybe that's why I find it most impressive. She has the ultimate gift of the gab. And I think again of the globe in the Vanitas, and I see Scheherazade as a globe that starts to move within the still life and keeps on spinning as a perpetual motion machine escaping time. Because the truth is, although Scheherazade is constantly at the brink of death, she is constantly orienting towards life. Not only does she not die in the story, hence her death is never told, but the earliest trace of Scheherazade can be found in Persian and Arabic oral traditions as far back as the 8th or 9th century CE, which means she came alive some 1200 years ago and lives on still. Me and Uni walked down the street after I picked her up from preschool. "Is this a dream right now?" she asks. I laugh, but she doesn't appear to be joking. The urgency with which we do something, the acuity something conjures in the moment of nearing, and the retrospective urge to revise what has been, is a specific time in itself. If Zeitlichkeit describes the structural fact that human existence is stretched between past and future, and supports that we can never be fully present, then can we trick time by postponing? Whilst too little time can cause Zeitangst, too much time can cause a feeling of having Überhangzeit, in which case one concludes there must be such a condition as Überhangzeitsangst, in which excess time or surplus time will lay a feeling of pointlessness. Can one describe aimlessness as urgent, or is this an oxymoron? If one can, then the aimlessness I feel when experiencing excess time is far more urgent than when experiencing time running out. The closing of a window inducing fristängste creates in me the opposite of depression, lethargy, and inability. I thrive on time running out. I am never as able or productive as when time is just about to end. And in the last grains of sand in this metaphorical hourglass, a dynamo starts to turn with such fervor. I've suddenly written 11 pages where 43 minutes ago there were 4. Because there is no greater responsibility than bringing about a life, there is also no smaller liability. Klein writes that a child's mortality is felt before it can be known, as I assume is true for many of life's most basic concepts. She believes that the awareness of pre-conceptualized death originates with the fear of losing rather than the fear that one might be lost. The losing fear is ascribed to that of the loved object. In my case, myself as mother is the one who might be lost, and my child the one who might have lost me, caused my disappearance. So then in a time before knowing death, living before knowing one is dying, the emphasis is not on the self, but on the loved one. Love, I believe, is the matter that most emphatically transcends death, and also, according to Klein, the primary reason for feeling fear. She says that there is no single moment in which death presents itself as an inevitability in a child's life. The realization unfolds in a series of events which piece together a narrative, but at the age of 5 or 6, I squash a spider under my thumb on our wooden kitchen floor. I witness it flat and lifeless against the floorboards, and I immediately regret the deed. I tell my brothers to bring it back, and when they laugh at me, my heart starts to flutter. A child's heart already beats fast, and now it pounds. Someone at this point, I don't know who, tries to explain to me that once something is dead, it is no longer possible to revive it, it is dead. There is an absoluteness about this statement, a fact which starts to simmer in me, in my pulsating small body, until it starts to fervently boil. The heat which my heart seems to emanate with every beat is unbearable. I start to boil, I must cool off. It cannot be that this spider cannot live again, because then one day I cannot live again. I too feel like I am being squeezed under the thumb of life, and the engulfing feeling is that this is not fair, this can't be right, this is not fair. I need to run, and I open the door and I start to run, and my brother runs after me, but suddenly I'm running as if I'm not just running, I am running. I run because if I just keep running, I might never die. I manage to outrun my brother, who is no doubt jogging, and slow down from laughing, which makes jogging hard. And yet to my mind, I have outrun my brother, and so I can outrun death. I arrive at the duck pond, 2 blocks from my house, where I no longer have any breath. I am all heart, a 6-year-old pulsating heart, and from then on my life is determined by the fact that I will die. I start to panic when brushing my teeth, because there is a moment of stillness. And in every moment of stillness, a deep-set looming void starts to grow in me, consisting of the inevitability that I will cease to exist. And so I refuse to brush my teeth. I can no longer look up at the sky because it reminds me of how small and insignificant I am. The introduction to my father's favorite TV show, The World of Science, begins. Whereas once I would nestle into his large, warm, comforting body and watch the opening sequence, our galaxy, the planets, and then the Earth, it now makes me feel like I will vomit. I meet every glance of a person with the echoing thought, "You too are going to die." It consumes my small but already very existential existence. Myself is a self assembled by a majority of parts consumed with ceasing to exist. When 6 years later I tell my mother that my grandmother, who has never been sick a day in her life, will die a week from now, and then she knows, I know for a fact that I've murdered her. It takes another decade or so before I tell someone about my preoccupation, and probably another decade until I admit that nothing has changed since I was 6, at which point my father tells me about his theory about the non-event of death. It can stay his theory because he has never read theory, philosophy, or psychoanalysis. And although he meant well, it didn't do me well to think of death as nothing. Because until that point, I still think I clinged on to the possibility of an after. But as Wittgenstein puts it, der Tod ist kein Ärgernis des Lebens, den Tod erlebt man nicht. Death is not an event in life. We do not live to experience death. And although one could speak and write endlessly about the fact that one day there will be nothing, at this point it seems like a waste of time because I now have a daughter. But because I now have a daughter, I have come to understand that my death, although will not happen to me, will happen to her, just as my mother's one day will happen to me. And I find myself feeble in my one burdened responsibility of attempting as best as I can for her not to stop brushing her teeth from anxiety, for her not to meet you and consequently consider that you too are dying. But the moment I tell her that there will be nothing I can do about death, a fact that confuses her, because I am still the person who can usually do something about injustices, I can do only what my mother once did in her attempt to soothe me. Tell her that it will be a long, long time before she dies, and therefore an even longer time before I die. I remember my mother telling me this when I was about Uni's age, 6 or so, and now my mother is 76 and time no longer feels as long, and I am still just as scared. And I realized that time indeed, although it is long, it is not long enough. I have come to realize that the only option for not fearing dying is to not be alive, and deducting that the last time I didn't exist was before I was born, which I couldn't know because I wasn't. So then what an absolute misuse of time it is to spend the little time I have thinking about the time I'll never get. I think in the end there might not be a tactic for tricking time, except to value it. But there does seem to be a way to live forever in fractions in the body of women. Through my grandmother's mitochondrial DNA, I already existed within her to a degree, just as Uni already existed within my mother when she was born, meaning if Uni too has a daughter, she will have already passed through me and I will remain in her. A maternal line never leaves the body of women unless broken, and because of my daughter, my grandmother lives still in her as a presence in absentia. This becomes clear when my mother sends me a picture of herself as a child, and I realize that my mother is also my daughter. The truth about the unknowing baby is that we do not know what the baby experiences. Perhaps that, rather than death, is the greatest mystery of life. We have made several educated guesses, but the idea that we're born unaware is limited to our adult cognition of what unawareness is, which in turn is limited to our language, concepts, and knowledge. Maybe the baby outsmarts us precisely because it knows nothing. Maybe because of its unawareness, the baby has no limitations. And since I speak about fairy tales and myths and narration according to fantasy, why not imagine that this time, a time we cannot remember, is where the incomprehensible truth lies? Perhaps we already possess the knowledge we spend our remaining time seeking, but it slips our mind in self-defense because we cannot grasp it once we become aware of knowledge, and maybe we cannot remember it because we cannot formulate it according to our language and concepts. My mother and my grandmother, her mother and her grandmother, are alive within me. This is not fantasy, this is science. And perhaps the time of infancy, in which who I am is being sorted and organized, is precisely the time in which I am all of them. Einstein writes in a letter to the family of a dear friend who has just passed away, a month before he himself dies. Für uns gläubige Physiker hat die Scheidung zwischen Vergangenheit, Gegenwart und Zukunft nur die Bedeutung einer, wenn auch hartnäckigen, Illusion, which seems to be an attempt to console the family to say that his friend Besso, even in death, occupies some form of space, or space-time, I suppose, even though it is not the one we happen to partake in. There also seems to be an attempted consolation of the self that is about to dissolve. And we may as well take these as Einstein's final words, because his actual final words were spoken to a nurse at the Princeton hospital who didn't speak German, so they were never recorded, which I have to say is a finale I think Einstein would have appreciated. We have all heard he was a funny guy, and the cruelty in the humor that one of our most respected geniuses should be lost in translation on his deathbed is, in this circumstance, rather, well, funny. We have a tendency to infantilize old people just as we do children, assuming they are confused or unaware. But maybe it is precisely their proximity to not existing quite yet or no longer, which lends our mind an openness, where it stops arranging according to reason and starts opening other passages that we have a tendency to pathologize in order to reason with. But maybe this disarray only occurs when the mind knows it is about to, once again, amalgamate with every other atom in existence. Since we cannot simply go nowhere, even if we no longer are. It might be preparing us for the fact that nothing comes into being or passes away in an absolute sense, which is not myth, not storytelling, and not fantasy, but a structural consequence of mathematics. My mother is a teacher of the sciences, maths among them. So naturally, because I am a born contrarian, I've never known how to count. But she is also an avid gardener and lives alongside the cyclical nature of things, where flowers bud and wilt, fruit grow and fall and rot, and even though at the end of every year everything dies, everything is frozen, she starts anew to seed and sprout and plant and tend to. And every summer we reap the benefits of seeing, smelling, and tasting the heavenly deliciousness of her belief in the beauty of life and death.